900 years ago, a monarch named Nefertari D. Lily did a bad thing. What she did right is she walked into an area containing 30 stone cubes, which when put together contain the location of Laugh-Tale, the ancient weapons, and the entirety of the true history of the world. And then, according to Mr. Emu, there was a little bit of an accident, I don't know, I guess Lily tripped and fell or something, and knocked these 30 mystery cubes flying all across the planet, so that 900 years later, this information could be gathered and used to bring down the world government. But let's just step back a bit. These 30 stone cubes are known as the Poneglyphs, and they were created by the ancient Kozuki clan between 800 and 900 years ago during the Void Century. The crafting of these stones is a skill that's been lost over time, but the Kozuki clan were an unparalleled group of stonemasons who have contributed to the history of the One Piece world in many ways that they'll never be remembered for. One of them would be the advent of sea stone, a mineral that originates from Wano and has since been used to craft a variety of weapons and technologies to assist in battling against Elf-Fruit users, as well as traveling across the Calm Belt without being detected by Sea Kings. Sea stone is also said to be as hard as diamond, and certain assumptions from here would state that the Kozuki clan crafted these 30 poneglyphs out of sea stone, which was available only to them at the time. However, we have seen Devil-Fruit users interact with poneglyphs on multiple occasions without losing their powers or being noticeably weakened in any way, and given that the poneglyphs are flat out indestructible, it seems more likely that the Kozuki stonemasons came up with an ultimate substance and/or process to create the poneglyphs. It's even possible that there's a slightly spiritual element in their creation, because within the One Piece world, there is an ability known as the Voice of All Things. And those with the Voice of All Things can allegedly hear the poneglyphs calling out to them as if they're living beings. Come and read me, they say, and then when you get there, it's in a text that you can't read. Absolute literary teasers, these poneglyphs. But this spiritual element may be possible if the poneglyphs were infused with the haki of those who were desperate enough to create them to leave this message. I suppose in a similar way to how the Iron Giant Emmet was left with a knot containing Joy Boy's haki. It may depend on the will of the user, but it seems that back in the ancient times there was a process to imbue haki into objects without that haki dissipating over time, or without needing a continuous stream of haki flowing into them like we see with many swordsmen in the modern day. However it was completed, this indestructibility has proven to be a great problem for the world government, as even when they have managed to find poneglyphs, they've been completely incapable of destroying them and completing their goal of erasing history. And they have tried every method available to them. With the world government, they have dominion over almost the entire planet, and yet they are completely powerless to destroy a bunch of rocks. Rocks that themselves have the power to undo their 800-year-old empire. But whatever the substance is and however they were created, it's pretty irrelevant compared to the purpose of the words inscribed on the stones, because these 30 poneglyphs are 30 messages that were deemed too important to ever be forgotten or erased by history. But this text also comes with an inbuilt layer of protection, which we've hinted at, as not just anyone can read them, because they are written in a lost ancient language that exceptionally few people have the knowledge and skill to read. So writing systems in One Piece, they've always been a bit left deliberately vague, and most text that we do see in the series appears to be written in simplistic and deliberately unintelligible gibberish to us, in addition to the occasional Japanese and also a surprising amount of English, all of which can be taken as the generic language of the One Piece world, likely universally spoken due to the world government having control of the planet. In fact, there are actually several One Piece novels that go into more detail about this. For example, in Straw Hat Stories, it was said that the world government forced all countries under their flag to abandon their native languages and adopt the universal language, which is then reiterated in One Piece Heroines, where it's stated that everyone who refused to abandon their native languages were turned into slaves of the world nobles. And the reason why this was mandated, in addition to the goal of creating a monoculture, could have been to wipe away any trace of languages even tangentially related to the ancient language. Like how if you speak French, Italian, or Spanish, they're all different, but they have the same roots. So if you speak one of the Romance languages, then you've got a pretty decent chance of at least getting a general idea of what's happening in another that you don't speak. So a big part of this Void Century mission was to erase every trace of this language, which in the modern day has left us with only two and a half people who can read it. The first is Straw Hat archaeologist Nico Robin, who amazingly taught herself to read it by spying on the research of the archaeologists of Ohara, as well as Kozuki Sukiyaki, former shogun of Wano, who inherited the teachings from his father, which may eventually be passed down to current shogun Kozuki Momonosuke. And as for the half, we have Charlotte Pudding, who is a member of the Three-Eyed Tribe, who have a vaguely defined ability to awaken their third eye, and apparently doing so would allow them to read the ancient language. At least that's the bet that Charlotte Linlin was making in her quest to decipher them, and also a bet that Blackbeard Blackbeard is currently making by kidnapping Pudding. However, the ancient language is not exclusive to the Poneglyphs, and the ancient script does appear on select few surviving relics throughout the One Piece world, like when Robin discovered the text inscribed within the ruins of Shandora. However, these instances are unbelievably rare, as they weren't inscribed on indestructible objects and were thus very much subject to the destruction of the Void Century, but somehow survived it. And I would say this is a classic example of the world government being their own worst enemy, because they've actively hindered their own progress by wiping out any connections to this ancient language, which means that even they cannot read the Poneglyphs, and given that some of them contain the locations of ancient weapons, information that is of great appeal to the world government, it may have been useful not to completely eradicate the language that makes it possible to find them. Some Poneglyphs also reveal other very sensitive information that the world government could use to prevent the dawn of the world from ever happening. Although I should say there is a chance that Saint Emu Nerona does know the ancient language, and that's how the world government eventually came into the possession of the ancient weapon Uranus. They may have found that Poneglyph and Emu deciphered its location. I don't know, lots of maybes, and we're getting very ahead of ourselves, because it's one thing to know how these stones were created, but the true logistical question is how they were scattered so perfectly and so obscurely around the planet. Moving these stones is an absolute nightmare of a task, and it has been implied by Emu that Nefertari D. Lily was responsible for scattering the Poneglyphs, and rather curiously, this is referred to as Lily's great mistake, as if it was an accident. But however it happened, on a certain fateful day, Lily's actions resulted in the quote loathsome Poneglyphs being scattered across the planet. Although Emu has since learned that this probably was not a mistake, and one theorized way that Lily could have accomplished this on her own is if she had the powers of the Nikyu Nikyu no Mi, Bartholomew Kuma's modern-day devil fruit, which allows him to repel people or objects all over the planet to specific coordinates of his choice. And that would explain why the vast majority of Poneglyphs ended up either directly housed by Great Kingdom allies or found their ways to other secluded locations where the world government was unlikely to discover them. And these 30 Poneglyphs were divided into 3 distinct types. The first and most common are the instructional Poneglyphs. They make up more than half of the mystery cubes in total, and they contain vital instructions to be carried out to continue the legacy of those who wrote them. For example, as stated previously, the locations of at least 2 ancient weapons are inscribed on instructional Poneglyphs. These are very important, but the main meat that we're looking for are the historical Poneglyphs. These are the stones that contain the true history of the One Piece world. There are 9 all in all, and when put together they form the Ryo Poneglyph, which in Japanese literally means the true text of history. However, by far the most exciting of stones are the 4 Red Road Poneglyphs, as they detail a series of locations of the planet which, when put together, will reveal the location of the hidden island Laugh Tale, where Joy Boy left the treasure now known as the One Piece. So all in all, the existence of these mystery cubes is very helpful, because they essentially give us a completion rate of One Piece. Once all 30 stones are found, we have 100%ed the game. And at the time of recording this video, we have discovered 15 of the 30 Poneglyphs, so over 1,100 chapters and almost 30 years into this story, and what we've done is cleared about 50% of the One Piece world, meaning that at this rate, One Piece will be over somewhere in the region of 2056. So we've got to get a bit faster at finding these bad boys. And previously, when I said we have discovered, I do mean that quite liberally. We as readers have seen exactly 15 Poneglyphs across the perspectives of many different characters, but no single character actively searching for them in the modern day has found this many. Although I should say that we have technically seen 16 Poneglyphs, however, much like the Lucia Kingdom, one of them never existed. If you watch the anime, this is actually the very first Poneglyph you ever see during the Alabaster arc. In episode 102, Zoro falls into a hole or something and ends up in a desert cavern where he and Chopper discover what is theoretically one of the most important objects in the world. This was during the time where the anime were pretty desperate to pack some filler in, and without really knowing what these stones are, they decided to foreshadow the Alabaster Poneglyph with a second Alabaster Poneglyph. In their defense, there's no way they could have known just how important or scarce these were going to be, and there's also an argument to be made that neither did Eiichiro Oda himself, which is why this was allowed to happen in the first place. And funnily enough, when Nico Robin does find the first actual Poneglyph in the series in the Tomb of Kings, she doesn't find the information she's looking for, and she asks, "Are there any other Poneglyphs here in Alabaster?" To which all of the anime watching audience reply, "Why yes, Nico Robin, yes there are." However, this Poneglyph was protected for centuries by the Nefertari family, as it was an instructional stone that contained the location of the ancient weapon Pluton, and whilst we as readers and watchers don't get let in on it here, this is where Robin learns that Pluton is is located on Wano, something that would take us a couple more decades of real-world time to learn at this point. And the second poneglyph we found was quite similar. This stone was entrusted to the Shandians and placed within the golden city of Shandora for protection, but unfortunately this entire city was blown up into the sky by the knock-up stream 400 years ago, making this by far one of the single most difficult poneglyphs to find. And it's another instructional one, this time containing the location of the ancient weapon Poseidon, which resides on Fishman Island. So pre-timeskip Robin was really getting a full spoiler rundown of post-timeskip events, and it's very likely that she has knowledge that we as the audience still don't, due to the island of Olhara where she grew up. Here there was a poneglyph housed within the basement of the Tree of Knowledge being studied by the scholars, and this stone does form part of the set of the 9 Rio poneglyphs, and the information it contains is the name of the Great Kingdom, the hyper-advanced civilization that existed during the Void Century, and the primary enemy of the 20 kingdoms that came together to eventually form the world government. And child Robin, mate, she was very busy, because after surviving a genocide, she ended up on another random island, assumedly in West Blue, that just so happened to have a poneglyph there as well, although we have no idea what was written on this one. My guess would be that this stone had already been discovered by the scholars or even Robin's mother, Nicoolvia, and its whereabouts were mentioned somewhere in the research notes that Robin sneakily kept track of. And so when she got booted off O'Hara, she went to find it. Because initially it does appear that Robin was intentionally searching for it, and I would love to know what was written on it, but we don't. And here is where things actually get just a little bit more tricky, because this poneglyph may also be the same stone that was found by Roger's crew during Odin's flashback. They stumble upon a poneglyph in an undisclosed location outside in a forest, just like Robin's one, and whilst the forests do look kind of different, they don't look different enough for me to confidently say that these are 2 different poneglyphs. So they may be the same one, and if that is the case, then we've only discovered 14 poneglyphs, which would lower our One Piece completion rate down to 46.6%. But a rather dangerous poneglyph is one that we've never seen, because it's located on the island of Hachinosu, which is the pirate paradise currently ruled by Blackbeard, formerly by Ochoku, and formerly to that by Roxy Zebek. And we don't know exactly what information is on this stone either, whether it's instructional or whether it's part of the Rio. All we do know is that it is very unlikely to be a road poneglyph. However, it's an extremely important stone nonetheless, and highly likely to be the reason why so many big shot pirates even know about the existence of poneglyphs, because generally what you would need to do is sail all the way to the end of the New World and land at Lodestar Island to be made aware of their existence, which Goldie Roger and his crew did. However, there's never been any record of anyone else reaching Lodestar Island. I mean, they could have, but the issue is that there's not a whole lot of point going there if you already know about the poneglyphs. And so I think it's more likely that the biggest of names, like the Whitebeards, the Kaidos, and the Big Mothers, all knew about poneglyphs because they served under rocks on Hachinosu, where one of them was housed. And this poneglyph was also the catalyst for the Rocky Port incident. Trafalgar D. Waterloo was hunting for it, which led to a fatesome amount of chaos where he formed an alliance with Blackbeard and Kobe to bring Ochoku down, and whilst I'm sure that Law took a rubbing of the stone, it is now firmly under Blackbeard's control. Most of these poneglyphs were sent to incredibly obscure and isolated locations, or locations that were incredibly difficult to breach. And Fishman Island happens to be both of those, very much out of the way and almost impossible to take by force, which is why it was chosen as a location to originally house not just one, but 2 poneglyphs, one of which was an extremely important road poneglyph, and the second stone contained an apology letter written by Joy Boy. This second one is notable because it's the only poneglyph so far that seems to contain no relevant information. It's just an apology from Joy Boy to the Fishman for breaking his promise. Meanwhile, another road poneglyph was sent to the Mink allies on Zo, and this was actually the first road poneglyph we encountered in the series, but we would discover another in the possession of Charlotte Linlin on Whole Cake Island. In fact, she had a treasure room with the centerpieces of her collection being not just 1, not even 2, but 3 poneglyphs. Now look, 3, it's not a traditionally big number. In fact, there's only 3 numbers smaller than 3, but when there's a total supply of 30, that would mean that at one stage Big Mom controlled 10% of the world's entire poneglyph supply, which is massive. However, one of these stones was found and gifted to her by Jinbei. It was originally housed within an underwater building that was thrown up to the surface by Wadatsumi, so I think this was part of a civilization that didn't make it through the Great Flood of the Void Century, and whoever they were likely allies of the Great Kingdom. We don't know what was written on this poneglyph because Jinbei can't read them, nor could any of Big Mom's crew at the time. Pudding had not yet awakened, and so we don't know what was written on the other regular stone either, or even the coordinates of the road poneglyph. However, Brooke did manage managed to take rubbings of all three and has now delivered them to Robin, who again has an insane amount of knowledge that we as readers do not. And we went on to find another treasure troves worth of poneglyphs on Wano, which makes sense because this island is the origin of the stones. However, they were much more split up. One was found by Trafalgar Law in the basement of Onigashima, another was discovered by Brook in the basement of the Flower Capital Castle, and the final road poneglyph was revealed in a cavern below the basement by Kozuki Sukiyaki. So they really like their basements on Wano. But this is very good news because we have officially seen all 4 road poneglyphs, and now we can just head straight to Laugh Tale and complete the pirate kingliness. Well, nah. The issue currently is that the road poneglyph that was on Fishman Island has now mysteriously disappeared. It was there when Roger visited, but not when the Straw Hats arrived. And it's said to currently be in the possession of a man marked by flames, who sails on a pitch black pirate ship and summons gigantic whirlpools should anyone try and get close to him. So even though we've seen it at one stage, the current location of that stone is unknown. As are 15 to 16 other poneglyphs, all of which hold integral information regarding the true history of the world.